Hi everyone, I'm Laura Gale Locke. On this edition of Local Loop, we're going to talk about some new building standards recently approved by the Wichita City Council. I am pleased to have Kurt Schroeder, our superintendent of our Office of Central Inspection, and also Tom Compton, who served on the technical committee as the chairman. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, glad to be here.
Well, first, if you just start off by explaining to all of us what these new standards are.
Well, the standards basically that the council has just adopted on first reading are new foundation standards for 1 and 2 family construction, which would be new homes or duplexes or additions to homes that talk about not just overall foundation standards and designs that are necessary dependent on what the soil conditions are at a site, how those foundations would be designed and installed. And then again, how the slabs that might be on the grade or whatever would be supported better and reinforced better. So that's really what these new standards are about. The key changes or improvements to our current code, the primary thing is soil analysis, and that soil sampling and analysis would be done on the pad site where the house would be built. And there would be at least 2 soil samples under the habitable area of the house to determine what those soil conditions are. And in some areas, soil types don't expand and contract very much. Other areas, there's soil types that are called expansive or fat or whatever you want to call it, that when they get moist, they expand greatly or they shrink pretty quickly when they don't have moisture in them. And a lot of that kind of movement can contribute to cracks in slabs, poured concrete slabs that maybe in a driveway you might see that, or a sidewalk, or potentially in a house on the slab that's on the ground. So the soil testing is a new standard, pretty detailed standard, and we'll get that tested and certified from a company that does that kind of thing before the permit's issued. So at that point, we'll know the conditions at the site, and then based on these new standards, what kind of minimum design has to be done to ensure a good, sustainable foundation and slab system. As the amount of what's called plasticity in the soil, or how much it expands and contracts, gets higher, then there's additional foundation design, deeper footings, all those kinds of things, more steel, better preparation under slab, more preparation of things under the slab, and to the point where if it's very expansive soil, then we would be requiring that a structural engineer get involved to actually design, specific to that site, the whole foundation system. And then typically a structural engineer might also ask for a soils engineer to look at things as well. So with that, I guess I'll turn it over to Tom, who worked on this task force for many months, really doing those design standards.
The task force basically was an assembly of people, structural engineers, soils engineers, we had builders in there, we had code people in there, and we basically took all the criteria that we thought was of value and necessary to build a really good foundation system in whatever kind of soil you might experience. And collected all that expertise and basically just came up with a document that summarized and kind of, we had to make a lot of compromises. I mean, every single expert in there had his opinion on what the maximum solution might be, but to take that information and make it into some kind of cohesive, realistic solution was really the biggest task. And it took quite a bit of time. I mean, we worked 7 months on the project. So, and every time we found a problem or discovered, one problem, or we wound up discovering that we needed to go somewhere else and find some more information, and that led to other things. So, but the document ultimately deals with everything from basement foundations to slab-on-grade foundations of several different types.
Mm-hmm. So what made you guys decide to start reviewing all this and going through this process?
Well, we had documented some problems in some slab-on-grade homes in southeast Wichita, And a couple of those had some pretty significant issues, where the heaving had cracked the foundation, the slab, not the foundation, the slab, pretty badly. Not sure what all the reasons were. That one of those particular houses was about 5 to 6 years old. But there was also a lot of exterior drainage problems for the general subdivision area that may have contributed to this, because moisture can be a big factor getting under that slab. You know, so we looked at those kinds of things, and well, how could we prevent that kind of thing from happening again? And so that's kind of where it started, and the focus immediately, I think, went to soil conditions, soil types, and how to better design to build on various soil conditions.
So do you think that this will solve the problem? I mean, how beneficial do you think these new changes will be?
Well, the no solution can be, 100% for every single condition, but what really is the ultimate issue is how many of those environmental type factors affect the foundation. Drainage, as Kurt indicated, the type of soils that you're building in. Those things create different stresses and strains on foundations, either basement or slab type foundations. So as those conditions become more extreme, so does the amount of rebar or the depth of the footing. All those kinds of issues kind of are addressed in the document. And that's what we tried to do, is find the best solution given any type of environmental condition you might build in.
Mm-hmm. Were the problems that you guys heard about that were documented, is that very common in Wichita?
I don't know that we've had a lot of complaints about that over the years, although we haven't done a lot of slab on grade construction either. It's become a more popular thing again, I guess, in the last 10 years or so. A lot of patio home development and things like that. So it's still a very small percentage of the house permits we issued. It might be 4 or 5% that come in that I just want to build my house on the slab, no basement, no crawl space. So we haven't gotten a lot of it, although some of the structural engineers and the soils guys on this task force, the structural guys have been around Wichita for working here for 40 or 50 years. So they had a lot of good input, because they have seen problems. There's a lot of houses that were built in the 60s and 70s in Wichita on the east side that are just on slabs.
Slab on grade construction has a lot of benefits. It's easily accessible, so for economy housing or accessible housing type programs, Habitat for Humanity uses slab on grade construction a lot because it's just very efficient to build on and creates a very durable house. But it has other strains and stresses on those materials on a slab type solution that need to be addressed, and that's what this document tries to do.
Mm-hmm. That's great. Yeah. So when you guys were studying this, did you find that across the city there were some soil issues, or is it really in one particular section of town?
Well, Tom can jump in on this too. There was a lot of some of the builders and things that were involved in this wonder, well, there's kind of some general soils map of the county. Why can't we just use that and say, if you're east of Hillside or something, you'll do this kind of foundation? Well, I think what we heard from a lot of soils guys, structural guys, everybody was, that might be good in general terms, but even one half-acre site might have 2 or 3 various soil conditions and types on it, even on the east side or in the west side, or where there's sandy soil somewhere. Generally, there could be some clay soil. So, so it was determined maybe you really need to be very site-specific on this stuff.
The other issue that comes into play is even though you may have generalized regions where certain types of soils exist, you don't really know the history of those pieces of ground. Fill material may be brought in or taken away, and you don't honestly know what you're building in until you get right down into the ground below the house and determine what's there. Fill material, again, is one of those areas that the document addresses, and it's the type of fill you use, how it's compacted, how it's prepared. all those things affect a foundation a lot.
So how long does it typically take to test soil?
Well, the test would, I think they can turn it around in a day or two. I mean, it doesn't take very long at all.
Yeah.
So then you don't really anticipate this a lot of time to the building process?
Not a lot of time to the building process, no. And actually, based on what we've been told so far by the major companies that do this kind of testing, probably not a whole lot of cost. I mean, maybe $50 to $100 per sample, and there's probably going to be a couple samples per site at least, and some maybe another or something. But
pretty cheap insurance, so
yeah,
you know what you're building.
And I think one of the things we found during the process, at least I heard a lot from the engineers that work with a lot of the builders and the concrete people, is a lot of builders in our area, they do these things, kind of do these things anyhow. I mean, they know that it's important to check soil, but you know, this is now a very specific standard to make sure that all people are doing this testing and everybody knows where they're starting.
So unless you have to bring in a structural engineer, you're probably not going to see a big increase in cost. Is that a fair statement?
As far as preparing the plans or just the construction itself?
Both.
Both. Probably not as far as preparing the plans. I mean, you know, if you're in a soil condition that's got extremely plastic and moving soil, I think you probably want to have a structural engineer look at that before you put a foundation in. As far as the cost of the construction goes, it depends. You know, obviously, the deeper the foundation, the more concrete you've got, the more steel you've got in it. So there are some material costs. The amount of labor, the labor's already there to dig the foundations. If it's 6 to 8 to 12 inches deeper, it doesn't really impact that amount of labor cost. A little more steel, putting in the steel might be a little more labor. All in all, I think it's the difference in the cost of the construction is going to be primarily centered around the materials. The material increases for the worse soils for the poorer soils that you build in.
And the labor for inserting the steel into the slab, that could be a little bit significant labor cost for some, because until this new standard was adopted, probably for 30 years the national codes have allowed concrete to be mixed, have a fiber type mesh or fiber materials mixed in it for slabs that wouldn't necessarily be reinforced with the steel. No longer will that happen. That fiber can still be used, that's great for shrinkage control, but you still have to have the steel in the slab, which will give it much more additional strength.
It's good to know. How does our revised guidelines compare to what other cities have?
Well, we looked at that a little bit. We looked at Overland Park's guidelines and some other municipalities. For the most part, I think we've got a superior product here because it is specific to our area. It covers a wide variety of different conditions and has considered a lot of those elements and really put it in a very, I think, a pretty succinct and straightforward format. Most of the other documents that we looked at was a lot of writing. We tried to gear this up and put as much graphic type information in there as we could. Okay. So it's not just a dry, long 12, 24, 50 page document that you have to read to kind of pull out what you're supposed to do. You can generally go to those guidelines and see what you should be building.
That sounds very helpful.
And we've already had contacts from some other cities that said, hey, we've heard about this, we've been watching it, and we'd like a copy of these standards. So that's a good, I think, indication that they've liked what they see. So hopefully it'll go a long way to preventing this kind of a problem in the future.
You guys have been in the business for quite a while. Was there anything that surprised you when you were doing your research or that you found particularly interesting?
That's a good question. I don't, I think the fun part of doing the document and being a part of the task force was just working with the different expertise and trying to pull that information together so that it all kind of, so that each expertise that we got was blended into the neighboring expertise, and we came up with something that was succinct and very straightforward. Kind of created a cohesive, workable document. So that was kind of a neat challenge.
And I was thinking the same thing, actually, because you had some soils engineers who were very conservative. I mean, they would go, dig out the hole 10 feet and redo it all and recompact it if you got a certain soil type, which is great. But you had that kind of a discussion. So it was a real broad range of perspective from people that have seen a lot of these conditions over many years, and that was a really great piece of this, I think.
How exactly will this impact your staff, Kurt?
We will, through this process, we have always done inspections on new homes of the footing, meaning that supports the house, the walls, for metal in those, and the depth of those footings and things like that. But we had never done a pre-slab pour inspection. We would go, the foundations would be there, inspected. We would go back and look at the underground stuff, like the plumbing and stuff, make sure it was set like it's supposed to be, but did not come back when they actually had everything set up to pour that slab. So now that's the one inspection we will do, and we will coordinate with the builder to be there when they got it all set up with the steel in it, and the sand's under it and the steel's there, to make sure it's the right kind of steel size and all that kind of thing.
Kurt kind of alluded to it earlier. I think one of the neat things about the document is especially the builders that were involved in there, the subcontractors and builders that were involved in the task force. I think most of the really good builders and really good subcontractors were generally doing all this before. Or at least the majority of it. Whether or not they had a document that actually told them what to do was a separate issue. But I think most of the good contractors out there already understood what these problems were and were addressing it already.
Yeah, that's good to hear.
Yeah.
What happens though if there is a bad contractor, I say bad, who doesn't follow the rules? What could happen to them?
Well, if they don't follow the code and then refuse to fix problems or correct those issues as we go along, then because we license the general contractors, there's a couple things that can go on. One, they could be brought before a board that reviews contractor licensing, have a hearing, and something could happen with their license, suspension, probation, even revocation. Or what sometimes happens is contractors will hire a job and then not finish it, or didn't correct the things that were identified to be fixed, and they could also be taken to our municipal court for a failure to act upon that.
Kurt, you mentioned that this has received the first round of approval from the City Council. What happens next?
Well, typically it would go through a second reading, be approved on second reading. The first reading and approval is usually the most critical, and it's had that. So we would anticipate that assuming that goes as usual, that this would be published around September 23rd, and then could be made effective immediately after that.
So what is it that people should walk away knowing?
Well, I think that this document, these standards, will really much better ensure that homes, particularly homes that are built on slabs and slab on grade, are going to be sustainable and be around for quite a long time without problems in just about every case. Now, the other thing is, people have to understand drainage and maintaining their drainage, and so water doesn't get under slabs and things like that. So that's an educational piece that homeowners need to know about. But I think this is a very good document, and will prevent this kind of problem in the future. Not always, but for the most part. Yeah.
That's great. Tom?
I think we had a great group of professionals that were participating in the task force, and all the input we got from them was was very well thought out and very well considered, and I think ultimately the document that we got was a realistic compromise on a lot of people's good ideas. Mm-hmm. It was a great experience.
Well, we're glad to have had you.
Yes, we were glad to have him and all the others.
Absolutely. Well, Kurt and Tom, thanks so much for being here today and filling us in. We appreciate it.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
And thank you for watching this edition of Local Loop.